Every morning, before the sun painted the sky with its first golden stroke, a woman named Clara walked to the old cemetery on the edge of town. Her clothes were worn, shoes patched more times than she could count, yet her hands always held a small bouquet of wildflowers. She laid them gently on a grave marked with the name Emily Hartman. No one knew why a poor woman, who barely had enough to eat, brought flowers to a grave that didn't belong to her family. She whispered a quiet prayer each time, touched the cold marble, and left before anyone saw her. The townsfolk often whispered. Some said Clara was mad, others thought she was a beggar trying to gain sympathy. But Clara didn't care for the rumors. The grave meant something sacred to her, something tied to a promise she made years ago, one she had never broken. She knew the world didn't owe her kindness, but she could still give it. Each flower she placed was a piece of her heart, a silent offering to someone who once showed her what compassion truly meant. On a gray November morning, as rain drizzled and wind carried the scent of wet earth, Clara arrived with her flowers as always. But something was different. A black car stood by the cemetery gate, sleek, shining, far too expensive for a place like this. From it stepped a tall man in a dark suit, his face pale, eyes heavy with sorrow. He moved with quiet dignity, holding a single white rose. Clara froze as their eyes met, unsure whether to stay or leave. The man approached slowly, noticing the fresh flowers on the grave. His brows furrowed, confusion written all over his face. "Who are you?" he asked softly, not with anger but with genuine curiosity. Clara lowered her head, her fingers trembling. "Just someone paying respect," she whispered. He looked at her torn shawl, her muddy shoes, and the humble flowers. "Do you know who's buried here?" he asked again. Clara nodded. "Emily Hartman. She saved my life." The man's expression changed instantly. His lips parted, his eyes widening in shock. "Emily saved your life," he repeated, almost in disbelief. Clara's voice cracked as she spoke, her memories pouring out like rain from a broken sky. Years ago, when she was homeless and starving, Emily had found her sitting by the roadside, offered her food, shelter, and warmth. "She treated me like a sister," Clara said. "When I had nothing, she gave me kindness. I owe her everything." The man stood still, silent for a long time. Then he whispered, "Emily was my wife." The words struck Clara like thunder. She took a step back, her eyes wide, heart pounding. "Your wife," she gasped. He nodded slowly. "She died 3 years ago. I come here every month. But I didn't know anyone else ever visited." His voice trembled as he looked at the flowers Clara brought. Wildflowers, the same kind Emily used to pick from their garden. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. She loved wildflowers, she said, smiling faintly. Said they were proof that beauty can grow anywhere, even in dirt. The man smiled weakly. "That sounds like her." For a moment, they both stood in silence, bound by grief and gratitude for the same woman. Then the man sighed, his voice cracking. "I never thought she touched anyone's life the way she did mine." Clara wiped her tears and said softly, "She touched many, sir. You were lucky to have her." The man introduced himself as Daniel Hartman, CEO of Hartman Industries, a name Clara had seen on billboards and newspapers but never thought she'd meet in person. His presence felt out of place in that quiet graveyard, yet his sorrow made him seem entirely human. He asked Clara to tell him more about how Emily had helped her, and Clara recounted nights spent under Emily's roof, learning to sew, finding work, rebuilding her dignity. Daniel listened with misty eyes. "I didn't know she did that," he murmured. "After she died, I shut myself away. Buried myself in work. I thought I was honoring her by building her dreams, but I forgot how she truly lived." Clara nodded slowly. "She didn't care about money, sir. She cared about people." Her words hit Daniel like a revelation. For the first time in years, he felt something more powerful than guilt, hope. As rain thickened, Daniel offered Clara his umbrella. "Let me drive you home," he said. But she refused gently. "I live nearby. The rain doesn't hurt me." He admired her humility. "At least let me thank you properly," he insisted. Clara smiled. "You already have, sir." "You listened." She turned to leave, but Daniel's voice stopped her. "Please, come tomorrow. I'd like to hear more about my wife. I feel like I'm meeting her again through you." The next morning, Clara returned, this time finding Daniel already there with 2 cups of coffee. They talked for hours, sharing stories about Emily, his of love and marriage, hers of survival and friendship. Together they pieced together a fuller picture of a woman who had quietly changed lives without seeking recognition. The more they spoke, the more Daniel realized how deeply he had lost himself after her death. Over the following weeks, Daniel began visiting the grave more often. Sometimes he brought roses, sometimes wildflowers. And each time, Clara was there too. They developed an unlikely friendship, 2 souls connected by grief and gratitude. Daniel started asking questions about Clara's life, learning how she still struggled to make ends meet, sewing clothes for neighbors and feeding stray animals with whatever she had left. One cold afternoon, Daniel found Clara coughing near the cemetery gate, her body frail and exhausted. Without hesitation, he drove her to a clinic, paid for her medicine, and made sure she had food and warmth. Clara tried to refuse his help, but he said gently, "You once said Emily cared about people. Let me honor her by doing the same." Those words brought tears to her eyes, for she realized Emily's kindness had found a new vessel, through Daniel. Weeks turned into months. Clara's health improved, and Daniel's heart began to heal. He invited her to work at his company's community center, where she taught young women to sew and earn a living. She hesitated at first, afraid she didn't belong among executives and polished offices, but Daniel said, "You belong wherever kindness is needed." And so, she agreed, carrying Emily's spirit with her every day. Soon, the center became a haven for women like Clara once was, lost, struggling, and forgotten. She taught them not only to sew but to believe in themselves. Daniel often visited, quietly watching her transform lives with patience and empathy. Every time he saw her smile, he felt as though Emily's light was shining again, guiding both of them towards something greater than grief. On the anniversary of Emily's death, Daniel and Clara stood by her grave together. The air was still, the sky painted in soft hues of pink and gold. They laid flowers, roses and wildflowers intertwined. Clara whispered, "She'd be proud of you." Daniel smiled faintly. "No, Clara, she'd be proud of us." For the first time in years, the ache in his chest eased, replaced by warmth and gratitude. As they walked away from the cemetery, Daniel turned to Clara. "You know, you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever, purpose." Clara chuckled softly, "And you gave me back faith in people." Their friendship became a living tribute to Emily, a bond built not on wealth or charity but shared humanity. Months later, Clara was invited to speak at a company event. Nervously, she told her story, how one woman's compassion changed everything. The audience was silent, some moved to tears. When she finished, Daniel took the stage and announced a new initiative in Emily's name, a foundation to support widows, single mothers, and the poor. He said, "This began with one woman who laid flowers on a grave." Clara couldn't hold back her tears. She looked at Daniel and whispered, "She's still changing lives, even now." Daniel nodded. "Yes, through you." Their friendship became a symbol in the city, a reminder that kindness outlives even death. Months turned into a year, and the Emily Hartman Foundation flourished. What began as a small community project now reached across cities, building shelters and teaching centers for women in need. Clara became its heart, the living embodiment of the kindness Emily once shared. Reporters often asked her why she, a once poor seamstress, kept working tirelessly without pay or rest. She always answered the same, "Because someone once believed I was worth saving." Daniel often watched from a distance, his heart swelling with quiet pride. He had built empires before, but this was the first thing that truly mattered. One day, Clara walked into Daniel's office, her hands clutching an envelope. "I can't keep taking your money," she said softly. "You've done enough." Daniel looked up, a gentle smile forming. "Clara, this isn't charity. You earned every bit of it. You're part of this foundation, part of Emily's story." Her eyes shimmered. "I'm just a poor woman who laid flowers," she whispered. Daniel stood, walked around his desk, and placed a hand over her heart. "No, Clara, you're proof that love never dies. You didn't just honor my wife, you kept her alive through every act of kindness you've given." That evening, they visited the grave together again. The sky was glowing orange, a soft wind stirring the petals of the wildflowers. Clara knelt, brushing away fallen leaves from the marble stone. "She'd be so happy to see all this," she said, her voice trembling. Daniel nodded. "Sometimes I think she brought you to me, that she wanted us both to heal." Clara smiled faintly. "Maybe she did. Kind souls always find ways to meet again." A tear slipped down Daniel's cheek. For the first time, it wasn't a tear of grief, but gratitude. Years passed. The city changed, the foundation grew, but the ritual never stopped. Every year on Emily's birthday, Daniel and Clara met at the same grave. She brought wildflowers, he brought a single rosé. Together they prayed, not for sorrow but for strength, to keep doing what Emily would have done. One morning, Daniel arrived alone. The grave was already covered with flowers, but this time, there was no Clara waiting beside it. He called her name, looked around the cemetery, but silence answered. Days later, he learned that Clara had passed away quietly in her sleep. The news broke him. Though she had no family, hundreds came to her funeral, women she had taught, children she had helped, strangers she had inspired. Daniel stood before her coffin, holding a small bunch of wildflowers. "You gave more to this world than anyone ever gave you," he whispered. "Emily would have called you her sister." He laid the flowers gently over her heart and closed his eyes, feeling as if he had lost Emily all over again. But life, as Clara once said, has a way of keeping kind souls connected. A week later, Daniel visited the cemetery and noticed something new beside Emily's grave, a small headstone with Clara's name. The caretaker explained that Daniel's foundation had arranged for her to be buried next to Emily, as per her final wish. Daniel knelt between the two graves, his hands trembling. "Now you're both together," he whispered. "Two angels who changed my life." He left flowers between their graves, roses and wildflowers. Intertwined, symbols of two women who had taught him what love truly means. From that day on, Daniel made it his mission to keep their legacy alive. The foundation doubled in size, now named the Emily and Clara Foundation. He traveled the world, sharing their story, of a rich man and a poor woman united by grief, compassion, and the belief that kindness outlives death. Whenever he spoke, people wept, not because it was sad, but because it was true. In his speeches, Daniel always ended with the same words, "The smallest act of kindness can echo louder than any fortune." As years passed and Daniel grew old, he continued to visit the grave every Sunday. His hair turned silver, his hands frail, but his heart stayed strong. One afternoon, a young girl approached him at the cemetery, a volunteer from the foundation. "Sir," she said shyly, "I joined because I heard your story. I wanted to be like Miss Clara." Daniel smiled, his eyes glistening. "Then you already are," he replied. He handed her a bouquet of wildflowers. "Place these between their graves." That's where kindness began. When Daniel passed away, the world remembered him not as a CEO, but as a man who built an empire of compassion. He was laid to rest beside Emily and Clara, completing a circle of love that began with a single act of mercy. Every spring, the graves bloom with roses and wildflowers. No one knows who plants them, but perhaps kindness itself does. And so, the legend lives on, of a poor woman who left flowers on a grave, and a man who found his heart there. Because sometimes, even the smallest gesture can change the world forever.